All right, well, thanks for joining us. So compared to Silicon Valley and Los Angeles, there hasn't been any kind of huge, crazy exit in terms of tech, right? You had Tumblr, you had Etsy, you had DoubleClick. Those sold for a few $1 billion each, but at the same time, you've had a little bit of a hiccup. You look at something like Gilt Group, which was valued pretty far up there, but sold for $250 million. Foursquare just had its valuation cut in half. What's going on here, and how do you guys plan to fix that?
Well, you're not counting AOL. AOL sold for how much?
$4.4 billion.
$4.4 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Fred.
Nicely. There's a lot of big companies here in New York, and I think, there's probably, if you go fast forward 5 years or 10 years, the list is just going to get bigger and bigger. So it's true that, New York is probably 20 or 30 years behind Silicon Valley in the development of the tech sector, but I think that things are going great, and there's a lot of, we've had big companies, DoubleClick, sold for several billion. How much did Google pay for DoubleClick?
$3.1 billion.
Yeah.
$3.1 billion.
Yeah.
You got some big numbers there.
Yes. Funding New York. It's good.
Thank you.
So you guys are working on something new, right? To kind of smooth things out and move this along, right?
Yeah, Tim, why don't you explain it?
Yeah, so I think, to your question, Fred and I basically spend obviously a lot of time in New York and spend a lot of time in the startup community in New York, and also Fred's leading one of the largest computer science programs in New York public schools, also that we're involved in. So the two of us actually spend a fair amount of time outside of work doing these things, and we noticed that there was a large community of people, essentially in New York, founders, and from a Silicon Valley perspective, when you go to Silicon Valley, the founders, the nonprofits, the universities all spend a lot of time together. In New York, it was a little less organized, so one of the things that we did was try to get it organized around a program called Tech NYC, which we just launched last week. And Tech NYC essentially brings together the university system, the startup community, the large corporate community, and a lot of the nonprofits together in one group. And I think that although New York is not Silicon Valley, New York's got one of the best trends in tech investing, and it was the 4th or 5th largest market 5 years ago. It's now number 2, and there's been 27 exits over 500 million. So I think from Fred's standpoint and my standpoint and Tech NYC's standpoint, it's one of the most vibrant and growing communities in tech. And
what are like the near-term marching orders for this organization?
Well, we're trying to grow our membership. So we launched last week, and we now have something like 450 members. There's probably 4,000 tech companies in New York City. So we maybe already have 15% of them, which is great. But we'd like to get every single tech company in New York to become a member. And you can, if you're interested in becoming a member, you can go to technyc.org, sign up, become a member. Companies under 20 employees are free to be members, which is great. So if you're running a really small company and you want to get engaged.
But I think you guys hired someone to run this as well? So.
Julie Samuels is the executive director. She was the executive director of Engine, which was a tech policy advocacy organization in Silicon Valley.
So what's like her agenda right now, at least?
I think we are working on making sure that we have a seat at the table, that the tech sector has a seat at the table whenever any important issue is being discussed at the state or local level. And frankly, even federal lawmakers have been reaching out to us to get the tech sector in New York's opinion, but that's not really the focus. It's really state government, city government, making sure that we make New York City the best place it can be to run a tech company, to start a tech company, to work at a tech company.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with everything Fred said.
I'm curious,
exactly
what
Fred
said. Getting a seat
said.
at the table, right? What does that mean exactly?
I think it's what Fred just said. It's from an easy to do business with standpoint, New York, we want it to be as easy as Silicon Valley. So that means talent, it means pipelining from universities, it means partnering with universities, it means partnering with founders. overall. And at the end of the day, I think at the end, what we really want is people to make a decision about where they're going to found their company or where they're going to go work. And today I think there's a giant westward expansion that happens from a lot of talent wanting to go to Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley, we have a lot of businesses there. It's an awesome place. But New York is one of the most unique cultural places in the world. So if we can,
still trying to understand though, like, is this just a bunch of phone calls?
No, seat at the table means seat at the table. Like literally this is what happens. There are meetings convened inside City Hall, in Albany, in other parts of government, even outside of government, where the government people get together with the real estate industry or the finance industry or whatever, and they talk about stuff, right? And we want a seat at that table. Okay. That's what I meant when I said it. I was being very literal.
Okay. So would you say is this like a response to the kind of lack of huge exits that you see in Silicon Valley?
No, I think this is the frustration that Tim has and every CEO in our portfolio has about how do I get the best people to come here? How do I get the best people to stay here? How do I get the best people to work in my company? And we're trying to grow an economy here. And I think it's gone from like almost 0% of the New York City economy to like, I think we're getting close to 20% of the New York City economy in the past 15 or 20 years. So it's becoming a huge industry in New York, and we want to make sure that our industry is getting what we need in terms of jobs, in terms of quality of life, in terms of rules and regulations, in terms of all sorts of things.
There's funding, for instance, for housing. Like where is housing going to go? There's business zones. Where the business zone's going to go? Does technology get financial breaks for building businesses here versus another area of the country? And those are all real-time decisions that get made. Mayor de Blasio showed up at our kickoff event. Senator Schumer showed up at our kickoff event. Mm-hmm. We've heard from Washington, D.C. already. There is a really large push to make New York City a place where it's really, really tech.
Well, I mean, there have been certain like lulls in the New York tech sector as well. Like you look at ad tech, like maybe it's not performing to what people's expectations were, 3, 4, 5 years ago, right? Is this still like, what's going on there?
I'd say the opposite, actually. If you look at like a huge amount of the internet industry is funded by advertising, and a huge amount of the innovation that's happened in internet advertising has actually come out of New York City. And I think whether it was DoubleClick or companies like AppNexus now or things like that, there's a huge platform of companies in advertising that have done a really good job. So, NYC's influence on the global advertising business, which is a $140 billion industry growing at 15%, is pretty substantial. And I think that what Fred and I want to do is make sure for the whole community is that the next round of whether it's ads or whether it's fashion or whether it's media or whatever the industry is, biotech, that companies and talent want to start their companies in New York and grow their companies in New York overall.
But there's another issue too, which is that new rules and regulations are being put forward all the time. Like I heard that there's like 5 different drone regulation bills in front of the city council this year. The various city council members are trying to propose rules about how drones can fly, in the skyline above New York. Makes sense, by the way, we should have some rules, but it also makes sense to have people from the tech sector, particularly people who know a lot about drones, involved in those conversations, so we don't get stupid rules, that we don't get people making it impossible to have a business in and around drones in New York City, for example. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about, is like, people make laws without even consulting the industries that they affect, and that isn't how it should be.
So I want to shift gears for a little bit. Speaking of ad tech, right? And because both of you guys are definitely experts in this space. With everything moving to, it seems in some ways that a lot of things are moving towards native advertising, right? Like, would you say native advertising is a fad?
I don't think. I guess I don't know if I'd call it native. I'd call it mobile. I think that a lot of ad systems and formats are getting designed now to essentially work on mobile, which they should be, because the majority of usage, majority of video, majority of connectivity with the consumers are going to happen on mobile. So you know, if you think about native as a category, really, I think what I see happening, I see it in my own company, I see it in the companies we deal with, I see it with the advertisers, is everybody's essentially trying to design ad systems for the new medium. That the fundamental shift to mobile will be as big as the original shift that happened when the internet started. And I think if you go back to the early days of the internet, there were a lot of quote unquote native ads, but essentially what it was ads being designed for the new way consumers were going to deal with information. And you know, 70% of our usage now at our company happens on mobile every day. So we may call it native, but what I would really call it is mobile. And I think native is a deceptive word. It's really mobile. Overall, that's what I see happening.
Well, I think also native is like inside, you know, Facebook, the ads look like Facebook posts. Inside of Twitter, the ads look like Twitter posts. Inside of YouTube, the ads look like YouTube videos. And that makes them feel more native to those environments. And I think that we see the same thing with content marketing, with things that AOL is doing and other content companies doing, trying to make the advertising feel more like the stories or the things that are running in their environment. So it's not so jarring, it's not so like, whoa, what's that thing flashing at me? People don't want that. So I also think native advertising is, the advertising is the same thing as the content, and it's just, it's displayed so people know that it's sponsored or it's paid or whatever, but it just feels much more like it belongs there.
So speaking of Facebook and these other distributed platforms, you know, there's a lot of content is moving to those platforms, and there's kind of like a different monetization engine that, or monetization environment around that, right? So giant elephant in the room. Why reportedly, you know, Verizon might be interested in Yahoo's core assets, right? Why do you think they'd be interested in that, and why do you think that's crazy?
I don't think it's crazy. I think it makes a lot of sense to have, you know, obviously it depends on whether they can get them at a price that makes sense, but it makes sense to combine a lot of, the industry's consolidating. There are 3, 4, 5 companies that have the most scale in the industry. These are the companies that are becoming the most successful at selling advertising, you know, creating content, and it makes sense. If you want to be one of those companies, it makes sense to get a bunch of those assets together under one roof and get synergies and get scale. So I think if you could get it at the right price, you should do it. That's my view.
Yeah, and I think I agree exactly what Fred said is, you know, we have 2020 goals that we have clearly as a company, and we want to get to 2 billion users overall. So, you know, whether it's organically or inorganically, you know, we have a very clear mission and pathway and strategy for what we're doing overall. And I think that, without commenting on anybody else's company specifically, you know, I would expect us to be at the table both in terms of product development and deal development over anything that will help us get to that, you know, get to those goals. And I would just go back to the fact that you know, there's going to be an additional 2 to 3 billion people coming online in the next few years, and it's the largest section of human engagement, connected engagement that's going to ever have happened on planet Earth. And the services that we build, the services that Fred invests in, you know, it's an unprecedented opportunity in front of all of us. So having scale really matters a lot, and I think you see companies across the industry trying to go for scale, and you see the offline companies really struggling with how their businesses are going to transition to a digital first, mobile first, you know, world. So we're in that same race, and we have to run as fast as we can.
So Fred, what do you think Tim should do with Yahoo if Verizon buys Yahoo?
Well, I'd like Tumblr back. I'm not joking. But I won't, but maybe not for the price we sold it for.
No advice or anything like that?
My answer.
All right. So what do you think the holdup is then? Like, you know, if there's all this, you know, hand-wringing over what's going to happen to it, right? You know, you probably know way better than I do dealing with this, you know, having sold a company for $4.4 billion, right? What's holding these things up?
Well, I think, you know, at a large level inside the industry right now, I think basically you have a dynamic set. There's 3 sets of companies. There's offline companies, there's the kind of larger internet companies, and then there's a new set of companies coming up that are disruptive, you know, companies like Snapchat, other companies like that. And I think basically from a decisioning process, all of the management teams and investors are essentially trying to figure out where to put their investments, and Fred and I are hopefully Tech NYC, bringing us right back to Tech NYC,
Yeah.
that programs like we're building will have a massive effect in terms of the ability for companies to scale and make those type of decisions. So I'm not going to answer your question, but I'm going to try to get you back on Tech NYC. How was that, Fred?
Good job, Tim.
So video really fast. Obviously like video is a huge push for AOL right now, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this as well. I know we didn't talk about it too much over the phone, but when you look at all these larger platforms like Facebook, you have things like Facebook Live, and Snapchat is becoming huge in video, right? Why go after a separate video platform instead of existing on these larger platforms?
What do you mean by that exactly? Why
put your content on third parties instead of building your own?
Yeah.
I think that one is you have to do both, and I think most content models in the world actually have off-network distribution. And I've said this before, I think some of the stuff that's happening right now is going to be the most disruptive thing that happens. The internet's not going to look very disruptive. When you look at what Facebook is doing in Snapchat and how they're changing distribution. So our company, for instance, has big investments in content. We want people on our owned and operated content. We want them on our video network, but we're also in major partnerships with Snapchat and Facebook. We're the largest shared news service on Facebook right now. So I think the reality is you want both. I like the business model of having both out there. And my prediction is that when you see Twitter do the NFL deal, I'd love your take on that, Fred, but Twitter do the NFL deal, and you look at some of the deals that just got announced recently in the digital space overall, I would bet the social platforms and third-party platforms are going to be great places to share advertising, and they're going to be great places to get paid if you're a content provider. And I think that in the last 6 months, there's been a tipping point where essentially the social platforms are going to compete with each other and compete with traditional media companies. And I hope that every social platform in the world goes for a content strategy, because I think it's going to benefit our business and other content businesses. So we're going to have owned and operated stuff, and we're going to have off-network stuff. I love what Snapchat's doing. I love what Facebook's doing. And the more they do it and the more they compete with each other, the bigger benefit is for our business.
So getting back to Tech NYC, I know you guys want to talk about that some more. What role will you guys personally be playing in this?
Well, Tim and I are co-chairing the organization, so what that really means is that we've helped build the board. So the board is on our website, technyc.org. You can go see who the board is. I think it's like 14 or 15 people. Broad representation of small companies, big companies, men, women, lots of diversity, which is great. Something that we didn't talk about that I think New York is really leading in. There are more women entrepreneurs in New York as a percentage of total entrepreneurs than any city in the country. So I think our job is to make sure that the board functions, that we provide Julie with what she needs to run the day-to-day business. We're not running it. We have day jobs ourselves, but we're providing board-level leadership and some strategy and things like that. Well,
and you guys have been icons in the sort of New York City Tech Center. Is this like a baton pass to Julie? Like, does this mean you guys are going to be taking a less larger role in terms of the sort of front-facing communication with local governments and state governments?
I don't think so. I think it's just going to make things more efficient. I'm still happy to go to any meeting that anybody wants me to go to, but it's better for Julie, who's doing this every day, 5 days a week, to be getting those incoming phone calls and figuring out if Tim should go to a meeting or I should go to a meeting, or one of these entrepreneurs in the room who has a better knowledge of the particular issue, maybe they should be going to the meeting. So I don't think we're going to do less, but I think we're going to do things where we can have an impact, and maybe not when we don't.
They're more connected. I think that some of the programs that the two of us are already doing individually, even bring the two of us together to help get people to invest. And then you take something like immigration reform or something like that. I may have an opinion about it. Fred may have an opinion about it. Maybe another company's doing something or involved with Forward.us. But getting all the founders and all the groups together to have that conversation adds a lot more horsepower. So I don't think we're going to take a step back. It's about adding more horsepower to these topics.
One last quick question then. Which presidential candidate do you think would be better for the tech sector?
Well, I personally think that Donald Trump's anti-immigration policies are really bad for the tech sector. I think that we are going to continue. We got to get the New York City talent pool more skilled for the kinds of jobs that we need, and hopefully eventually we can hire just local. But for the next 5 or 10 years, I think we got to continue to bring people from other parts of the country and other parts of the world to New York to staff these companies. And I think the anti-immigration policies are bad for tech and they're bad for New York City.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. Great job.